Welcome to Security Take Two. I'm Chester Wisniewski, and I'm here today with my co-host Ben Versharan.
This is episode 13, and today we're going to talk about Mythos and the Vulnpocalypse. It's the 26th of June, 2026. And before we dive in, I think it's fair to say, Chet, that the thoughts and opinions are our own and not that of our employer.
Absolutely. And if you know where we work, you can find my official version of this podcast that I did do on behalf of the company. And my opinions are largely the same, but they are certainly the possession of only ourselves and our podcast as Security Take Two, which is not an entity. So nonetheless, this is an interesting one because there's so much hype and noise about offensive use and defensive use of AI tools in security. And one of my pet things in my head that I think is the reason for that is actually, it turns out cybersecurity is a naturally good application of a lot of this large language model generative AI content. Like there was real potential for meaningful automation in our field, and so we get a little bit of extra AI attention. But there's going, whether you agree whether these tools are good or bad for the world, whether they steal intellectual property, we'll put all that aside. The reality is, to quote a former colleague of ours, we can't put the genie back in the bottle, right? Like, this stuff is out there. So I think you and I today are going to cover 4 or 5 main areas where we think there's going to be impacts on cybersecurity from these types of tools. And to be fair to all the participants out there creating these things, Mythos stands in for what I've heard called a Mythos class model, which, it may be from OpenAI, it may be from Microsoft, it may be free, it may be Chinese DeepSeek. You said there's a new Japanese one, Ben?
Yeah, Fugu, that came out earlier in the week. There's a number of different models out there.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to exclude any of them, and we can assume that what we consider amazing Mythos banned by the US government technology will be pretty generic and boring 6 months from now, when there's even more advanced stuff and freely available things probably will approach or surpass what today we're amazed by, if you can simply go back 6 months, 12 months, 18 months in time, and each time you look stupid 6 months before.
Yeah, and that's actually one of the things that's really interesting about talking to this subject professionally. Like, one of the things that I don't like is sound bites and being quoted, because it is very much rapidly changing when it comes to this space, that's for sure. And, one of the things that I found fascinating is, you mentioned Mythos and Friends as, these frontier models that are really good at cyber, but there's only a matter of time until these things are also distilled down into, smaller models that you can run locally as well without guardrails and everything else. So to get into it, where do we begin, Chet? What angle do we go for first?
Well, why don't I guess we can talk about the Vulnpocalypse. We've settled on a few different broad areas to discuss, and to me, the Vulnpocalypse is an IT-based fear more than it is software developers or other affected populations in the cybersecurity world. So maybe that's a good place to start. Again, listeners, because Ben and I talked about it beforehand, we're separating IT and security. So we understand that in many organizations, security may be part of the IT function, or they may be part of the same teams. I'm talking about them as separate entities because I think the impacts are distinct when you're looking at how to use tools and set cybersecurity policy, as opposed to who goes and runs around and does the patching and actually manages the firewalls and things day to day, right? So I find those kind of distinct pieces. So the IT piece, which is where I think the Vulnpocalypse fear comes from, right? Like, are we going to have patch Tuesday and patch Wednesday and patch Thursday every week?
Potentially. We can talk about that. So obviously that's a software consumer issue, right? Like, I have got this stack of software, and are we going to fall into this persistent, rapid cycle of patching as vulnerabilities are released, potentially on a daily cadence. There's a lot of talk now about machine speed, patching, and resilience. Have you come across that terminology?
Yeah.
Yeah. So essentially, it means like if we've got frontier models that can detect a vulnerability, that vulnerability is then weaponized within minutes, which means that you need to patch within minutes, and that's where a good foundational understanding of your infrastructure is required in order to manage these things. So that way your engineers understand, or your IT people understand what's important, and then from there are able to make risk-based decisions on, do we spend our whole life now patching? Do we have a dedicated patching team, or do we patch what matters?
Oh, I just feel the rabbit hole coming on. This might be a really long podcast because there's just so many areas that you touched on there that I think are all distinct things to talk about again, which is when a new patch comes out, it will no longer be days, and it certainly might even be less than hours, and we could be in minutes of patches being reversed. And that's one of the things that Mythos specifically allegedly is really good at. And that is that means there's no patching window, right? And then the question that spawns in my head is, which version of Gmail are you using? Like, should we have versions at all? Like, is this an antiquated approach to software? We don't think about versions in the cloud. I mean, I wish I could pick which version of, I'll go old school and say Office 365 that I could use, so that I didn't have Microsoft 365 with Copilot in everything. But I don't, right? We don't talk about versions in the cloud, and it just rolls. Should software have versions? Are we doing it wrong?
I don't think we're doing it wrong. Um, are you speaking specifically SaaS applications? Should they have versions? Or are you saying software in general?
Yeah, like if we're worried about patching our Fortinet, our Sophos, our Palo Alto, and we're worried about patching our SharePoint, our Exchange, or our Adobe Creative Server, whatever it is, are we doing it wrong? Like, should these become hot fixed things that when the vendor is aware and a fix is available, it's just consumed? Puts a lot of faith in the vendors to do it right. But to be fair, the number of bad software updates that took down organizations can be counted on my two hands in the last 30 years of my career.
Yeah, I agree with you. So, well, that's the beauty of SaaS applications, right? Is the hot fix is available, and essentially, if a vulnerability is found in a software as a service application, it is patched. So you don't have, you know, from that perspective, it's almost a relief to an IT team to be like, let's just outsource it. And that's, I think, why people enjoy Office 365 so much. Copilot aside, and I won't talk about glorified Clippy. I don't rate Copilot as a tool suite. But again, if you've ever administered SharePoint, you would know that every patch was scary. You didn't know what time you were going to go to bed that night, and you didn't know if you're going to lose your weekend. You outsource that to Microsoft, and now there's very few organizations running Exchange, and as a result, you would assume that organization is more secure.
But there's no reason at all for that to be a cloud thing. It can happen. I mean, their cloud is just their computer running their stuff. You can run their stuff on your computer, right? I mean, there's no reason you can't deploy Docker containers and Kubernetes environments that just do this. Like, doesn't have to be in the cloud, right?
That's true. It depends on the software suite as well. But all in all, I think hotfixing, we're at the point where you should be able to trust a vendor to deploy a hotfix. Software stacks are, far more stable now as well. The other thing is, and we can talk about this later on, is software development augmented by AI and like the automation of testing of patches, fixes, different customer scenarios before you deploy software has become vastly, vastly better as a result of AI in the last couple of years. So I would say trust your vendor there. I don't know if you agree with me or not.
I do. I don't think very many vendors offer it, and that's a concern. But if we're worried about the vuln-apocalypse, there's different ways of approaching it. I think you mentioned one, which is you could just give up on the SaaS stuff and move to the cloud.
Hmm.
And then you don't have to worry about it, because when it is vulnerable, the vendor is ultimately responsible for the application layer, and they will hot fix it as necessary, and you won't know the difference. And if they get 10% of the way through their hot fix and it starts causing customer problems, hope that you're not in those 10%, but they can stop and roll it back and you never even know it. You don't have to be involved, and it's self-healing. But a lot of organizations, for sovereignty reasons and others, are wanting to move away from the cloud. And I think vendors ought to offer similar things in their products as well to make them self-healing, if you will.
Is this just? I th- I wonder if the general mentality around hotfixing and trust in a vendor is just years of being burnt. You know what I mean? Like trust issues that exist because the moment you talk about automatic patching, I think back to earlier in my career, and I mentioned Microsoft Exchange earlier, but like I've experienced scenarios where every desktop in an organization is blue screening, and you've got to manually go around and re-image them. Um, like I think IT people have just been burnt too many times at this point.
Well, as a almost a generation older than you, most of my nightmare scenario was before Windows had blue screens. But the, the for me, my demon was Cisco. I could not find an iOS version that I could deploy to a few thousand routers around the globe for a rather large company I was contracting with. I could not find one iOS version that would work on our entire suite of routers. And like when you found the one that worked, my God, you didn't touch it. You were not going to upgrade that. It didn't matter how big the vulnerability was. And we didn't really have that kind of a rat race back in the day. But even if we did, it didn't matter. Like that was the golden version that worked on all of them, and they're going to get it for the next 10 years.
As a previous Cisco engineer or network engineer that was fully entrenched and lived the Cisco world, I'm actually going to reach out to some ex colleagues because I need to know if it's still the same. Because yeah, I agree with you. We used to have just different releases. I would find a bug and would get what they called a train release that fixed that particular bug, but then you'd always be too scared to update. That router, because you're like, well, it's got that train release that fixes that routing issue that I discovered. If I patch it and update it, I could find that bug again. So yeah, you know what?
Well, depending
I've got
in
some
a big
people to
enough
reach out to.
organization, it was almost impossible, right? It's like, oh, this version works with our VPN, but it breaks the BGP. So we can roll that out to every site that doesn't use BGP.
Yeah.
It's a nightmare. But I think that is where a lot of this hesitance comes from, and it is from people. Uh, I'm in my 50s, and my generation currently is a lot of leadership that decides these things for companies. And as a result of that, I think people in particular that have been through those experiences in those years, and I think the worst of it, to be honest, was exactly from around when I started to around when you came out of it. Those were the worst years for this type of thing. We saw it with Windows, we saw it with Lotus Notes, we saw it with Cisco's, we saw it with a lot of different vendors. And those folks are in charge of a lot of things now and have, you don't want to get burned twice making the same mistake. So I think it's fair to say if we could patch faster, we would already be doing it. And telling us to patch faster is pretty dumb. And not to pick on the
Hmm.
former head of CISA, but like the idea of shields up suggests that I should ever take them down. Like that's just not a thing. We can't try harder. I mean, maybe we can try harder a little bit, but I don't think most IT teams feel that they really have the ability to deliver patches and fixtures faster than they are. And even if they adopt a little more cloud, maybe some hot fixing in there. I think the other thing that IT teams then start looking at is better mitigations and better hygiene.
Yeah, 100%. Like, understand your assets, understand your attack surface, and from there, again, mitigate those risks by like, do we actually need this externally available? Can we put it behind something? Can we take it off the internet? Um,
Said
yeah,
TNA
but
or segmentation with more software firewalls, or there's a lot of solutions, but very little that's deployed.
yeah, and but this comes back to how many times have we podcast and talked about a breach and or we've just been on the phone to each other and been like, oh, this person got breached, and then you realize that again it comes down to just general poor hygiene. Um, in a lot of ways, this is not too different or too dissimilar to you know just doing things right from the beginning.
Yeah, vendors can play a big role in nudging things the right direction, especially cloud vendors. But even in non-cloud products, I was actually quite happy to see. I logged into my Sophos firewall this weekend, and it notified me in the dashboard that it had disabled the web-based user portal where users can like adjust their spam settings if you're using it for email filtering or as a UTM, that kind of thing. And it just went, oh, nobody's logged into this user portal in more than 90 days. I'm turning it off. Like, just get rid of the attack surface. And if you want it back on, you have to manually go in there and push the button. But if nobody's used it in 90 days, just start turning stuff off. I love that idea.
Yeah, but in saying that, if you look at Reddit and you go to, say, our MSP, our cybersecurity, um, when vendors make these decisions on behalf of end users, it is often met with a lot of angry, loud, noisy people that believe that they've been mistreated and vendors acted unethically by making these decisions for them. So there's this really fine line of like, how do you balance this as a not even a cybersecurity vendor, as a software vendor? How do you make these decisions on behalf of customers without getting a angry reaction online? And there's for every many thousands of customers protected based on these decisions, it's always allowed upset people on Reddit, on LinkedIn, that start CCing or commenting on everything that the CEO posts on LinkedIn because they're unhappy about it, and that then makes a company look bad. So it's really difficult to it's difficult to find a solution to this.
I have easy answers from my side, which is the one thing I learned from fairy tales my entire childhood is doing the right thing requires bravery. You just got to do it. And two, I don't care how much noise there is on Reddit and X and LinkedIn and your favorite Mastodon instance and whatever, YouTube Shorts, I don't know. None of that I ever heard of affecting a CISO's decision to buy a product.
Maybe not a CISO, but if you need technical buy-in, and technical people are on these platforms and quickly make an opinion, and a hive mind is a real thing. So I don't know if I agree with you at all there, actually.
No,
Yeah,
that's
perception
we
matters.
should disagree. I don't see it having much impact, and it's typically a flash in the pan, and it goes away 3 weeks later, and nobody remembers that ever happened.
Yeah,
There's the big thing of the day is the big thing of the day. That's what drives social media attention, and the big thing of yesterday is never a thing. And if you're doing it for good and not evil, by hot fixing people and protecting them, taking the foot gun away from them instead of giving them a foot gun, I'm a fan of this.
yeah. Look, I don't disagree with you, but technical people tend to never forget, and they don't forgive either, which is exactly why we're in this predicament of why don't people patch
There's a
what they're
reason I
doing.
don't subscribe to Disney Plus right now because I'm still angry about the Disney Millennium Copyright Act of 1997.
There you go. You just proved my point. So, but
So, all right, I'll cede that one, but we can use that as a pivot because I think the mitigations are important, and that's some of
yeah,
the types of things we can do to mitigate. We can reduce attack surface, whether it's forced on us by our vendor or whether we choose to do it ourselves. We can probably not outspeed the people using AI to target these vulnerabilities, but we can segment. We can put things behind ZTNA. We can increase the things that we've been talking about for years, like segmentation and zero trust, are still a struggle for many organizations. But I think you'll get more payoff by doing that than worrying about every single manually applied patch to at least reduce the blast radius and hopefully increase the signal to your MDR provider or your SOC to suggest that something bad has happened. Really, the criminals are going to succeed at breaking in on occasion. You have to accept that as an IT practitioner. What you can do is make sure that when they break in, it's super noisy and you notice that they got in, and that it takes them enough time to get out of the escape room that you can respond.
yeah. All fair, all fair statements for sure.
Now, if I'm looking at those products I have deployed as an IT guy, though, this is where I think it pivots us into the software dev conversation. I'm probably going to have very different experiences with things that I have that are based on open source software and tooling versus the things I buy from vendors that are closed source. And this may be the first time in my entire life that I'm publicly on the record in my independent voice suggesting that maybe closed source might be better than open source sometimes. But I think there's a very big distinction there on how these tools work. And I know you've played with a lot of these generative systems, right, Ben? So, I mean, having access to source code makes the game very different than somebody trying to maliciously use these things against a black box, right?
Absolutely. Well, I should say defensively, that's an advantage as well. And what I mean by that is, like, yeah, open source, if you've got access to the source code, and you're able to do a code review with an LLM that exceeds cybersecurity expectations, the Mythoses, the Cyber 55s, and similar, yeah, the chance of being able to find a vulnerability when you have the source code, LLMs seem to be incredibly good at that. But on the
So
flip
can I
side,
can I stop there just for a second? I think you just summarized what's always been known as Linus's law. Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow. And these AI tools are just a hell of a lot of eyeballs, right?
yeah, and the beauty is, you can set up open code, Claude code, whatever agentic harness you like, give it a code repository and say, have at it, and go off to your coffee machine, make an espresso, come back and see what the results are, see the reasoning in real time. And, as a result, you're right. From an open source perspective, risks are then incurred because people have got the ability to run these models and find vulnerabilities. However, from a developer standpoint, this is an advantage as well because you can, as I mentioned earlier, you can automate security reviews, you can do unit testing, and I don't know if you've heard of the concept of loops recently, but essentially it's just a continuous feedback loop where you can essentially have a software development LLM or agent, let's call it an agent, a security practitioner agent, and a reviewer agent of all their work. And you can essentially have machines talking to machines and saying, I think I found a security issue reviewing this code as a software developer. The security practitioner agent can then say, I'm going to review this and see if it's exploitable, and then hand it off to essentially a product manager agent, which will then loop back to the software developer agent to say, we found these issues, you need to go and remediate it. So
Wait, what's that noise in the background? Is that a cash register sound? I hear a lot of tokens being burned.
tokens are being burnt. So that's a reality. Like, it is expensive, but to go back to what I was just saying, you've got this autonomous feedback loop of software development where you've built something, you're now reviewing it, and in very much quick succession, bugs are found, patched, retested. So as a result, call me a dreamer. But I think software is going to become a lot more secure in the long run based on things like this. But it's going to cost a lot of money.
I think you're right on the. I mean, aside from the cost thing, which we'll talk about the cost at the very end, I think, because there are issues there, but I still think there's an open source closed source divide that what you're talking about doesn't address. Like, I think for closed source developers, especially security teams, like a lot of the companies in the cybersecurity space, massive advantages for it, for using it and automating a lot of this. And I think a lot of that'll happen. But I don't know any open source developers that are going to spend a month building that tool chain and those harnesses and skills and all these different things. And most of them, to be honest, when you report bugs to them, are quite security ignorant to begin with. They're probably not going to make that effort, and they're volunteering their time, like 3 days developing that system to do that and automate that with your GitHub actions or something, or whatever whatever environment it is you're working, whether you're working with the source or when you check code in or what you want to do. But like, most open source folks are like, that's 3 days not spending time with my kids at the playground because I'm doing this on my spare time. I ain't wasting my effort doing that.
Yeah, it comes down to the quality as well. Like, what I find interesting is FFmpeg was a project that shut down public pull requests because they're like, we're just getting an incredible amount of slop requests where there's nothing to it, but people are submitting pull requests and padding out their resume to say they found vulnerabilities in our software. Then, as part of Project Glasswing from Anthropic, they had their code base reviewed. There was actual vulnerabilities discovered, and it was of a high quality. So that I think there was a vulnerability found that had been there for like 11 years. So there are some goodwill from for bigger projects as well to then have like we essentially need these closed source companies that are building a lot of their infrastructure uh, on top of open source to actually pay some goodwill and start funding essentially open source projects to to also be scanned and pay for their token costs, right?
I do not think depending on charity is a strategy. Um,
It's a
we're going to have
strategy.
a we're going to have a long tail of challenges. So I want to tie this back to the IT teams. The reason I brought it up, we're going to see very different patterns in how these tools impact open and closed source software and how that affects the amount of patch workload there is if there's not hot fixing or other solutions, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so a lot of teams, I don't know, have been thinking about this, but like, the last couple patch Tuesdays have had 100 plus more bugs than the median, but it had zero impact on IT teams because it was one patch. They're still releasing them on a cadence. Open source doesn't have that privilege. So a closed source vendor like Microsoft can use M-Dash for their proprietary tool. Kudos for the naming, guys. They can use M-Dash to find 150 Windows vulns, but they've got the whole month to fix them because nobody else knows about them. Only Microsoft has the source code and that old version of NT they sold to the Russians, but we won't get into that. And only Microsoft has the source code, and Microsoft has access to all these frontier models and can find all the things. And you can imagine a scenario where the amount of vulns fixed per Microsoft Patch Tuesday doubles, triples like it has for the next 18 months. And then it tails off into a world where Windows is a hell of a lot more secure because all those things that it found over all that time. And Microsoft can carefully triage them without disrupting IT teams. If I'm OpenSSL or I'm not trying to pick on those guys. I mean, we could name a million different open source projects. I'm a big fan of Home Assistant, and it doesn't feel to me like there's thousands of developers working at Nabucasa Labs. So I'll use them. But like, you start throwing this open source code that anybody can run the model against, and the models keep getting more sophisticated, which we'll also address in a few minutes. Um, with open source, there's going to be this massive influx of fixes with no time to adjust to them because they are public the instant that they're found, basically, or being exploited nearly instantly. And even unwitting bug fix submissions to bug databases that accidentally don't get marked private are going to leak them, and they're going to be all over the place. There's going to be this massive crushing wave, and the big projects, as you say, maybe the OpenSSLs for sure, maybe the FFmpeg's, a lot of projects like that will get a lot of corporate sponsorship from the Metas and Alphabets of the world, and maybe ride a similar pattern to the closed source stuff, if not having to react a bit more quickly. But that long tail of open source is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah, but so I don't disagree. But then you got to look at things like breach path, right? And this is where I've been looking at a number of startups recently, um, mostly out of curiosity. But a lot of people are now doing some form of like breach path to be like, okay, well, you've got instead of just having say a vulnerability scan that says, hey, here's your vulns. I actually breach path takes a different approach where it says, here are your vulnerabilities, but like you've got this software suite on all of your endpoints and it's vulnerable. But in order for an attacker to exploit it, they need to go through these steps, and it would actually mean that your infrastructure is already owned before that bit of software becomes a problem. So that's where, again, taking a pragmatic approach and being like, well, what's the actual exploitability of that particular software? If it's on the edge and on a server, yeah, I've got problems. But if it's inside of my network and away from opportunistic attackers, well, then it should be fine, and I've got more time to patch.
Yeah, but that's more burden on the IT teams, and they can't even already do the patches. Yeah, it sounds great on paper, but the human impact of that is enormous.
Yeah, that's fair. So,
Well, let's talk about some more software dev stuff because looking at securing software development, and I'll expect you to, as more of a coder than me, which is to say you code it all, and more experienced at using some of the frontier models. I'm currently playing with Qwen 3.6 on a GPU at home, so I'm not like totally ignorant. But um, let's talk about software development using this. Like, is this going to change? But you already mentioned some automation as you're coding, right? It seems like organizations that embrace this smartly can start shipping fewer vulnerabilities, right?
I believe so. Yeah, that's where I stand today. And it's funny because there was initially some really negative publicity about LLMs generating poor quality code, and it's not wrong. And I still do see poor quality code out of it, but out of some LLMs or some circumstances. But you've got to remember, this industry has been rapidly evolving. Like the last 4 years, it's just been exponential changes. And one statement you make about quality or ability one day is essentially null and void a month or two later, or even less time, which is why being quoted publicly is always a concern about these things. But so if you look at when Microsoft first launched Copilot in VS Code, it was essentially a glorified autocomplete with no real context, and it was just auto completing what it thought the developer wanted. And there was a lot of really terrible code being generated. But in a modern software development suite, like I said, there's agentic AI harnesses, as they're called, that has got a lot more business context, has got a lot more awareness, or essentially a knowledge base on the code base. And as a result, we're seeing far better quality code being generated at scale. Now, I still think it's really important, and some people would argue with me and say, don't even bother developing software. You don't need software developers to do this. It's still important to have human oversight and to understand what you're building. But I will say, as a software developer, when you say, I'm going to go through a planning cycle with an agent to say, this is what I want, these are the frameworks that I need to use, this is the outcome that I want, then you can sit there and witness it, build it, and review it. It's faster. The quality now is really, really good. And as a result, I actually think a lot less mistakes are being made, especially like one of the things that I found that LLMs do really well now is that base application layer. Like every time I built, say, a new web app back in the day, I would have to, pick my framework. And let's say it's a Python web application framework. I would say, cool, build on top of that. But you were repeating the same steps. You were grabbing, setting up a config file. You were setting up your environmental variables. You're re-implementing authentication, even if it was, using an open source library. Now we're not having to deal with those in the weeds things. Like the base application is built sound, it's structured, and it's incredibly well documented as well. So that's something to keep in mind. Like, software developers have always been really bad at documenting code. So picking up someone else's code, you'd always look at it and be like, oh my goodness, who wrote this? Are they an idiot? When one of the beauties with an LLM as well is it typically gives you an output on why it made these decisions, what those decisions meant, and what you get, which is cool.
Don't underestimate developer stupidity would be my warning. But yes, for well-intentioned developers, I'm actually, you can't see me right now, Ben, because we're not on video, but I'm wearing a shirt from our friend Jake King's new company, minimal.dev, that says dash dash dangerously dash skip dash permissions. And I think that sums it up. The fact that that's a flag that you can pass to these models is concerning. And somebody will outdumb any policy you have. However, I think I agree with you largely. I mean, I think the ability to also establish corporate standards for the agents that meet your security policies is a nice advantage, and then it can be standardized very easily, right? You write a markdown file with how you want these models to be instructed, and you've got a reasonably consistent way of enforcing security that you'll never implement with human beings.
100%, yeah.
So let's another bridge topic, which I consider one foot is in software dev, where we've been talking, and the other foot is in the CISO realm that we'll discuss next. So my awkward transition here is bug bounties. I think this is a really interesting topic. Like, is it the end of the bug bounty? And of course, it's not the end of the bug bounty, I don't think. But then again, it depends on how much time you spend with Casey Ellis, whether you think it's bug bounties have an end or not. but it does get into the CISA world of solving a few challenges in a different way. And like everything, there's always a trade-off, right? I look at things like from with a foot in CISA world. I look at things about spend. Okay, I've got a bug bounty. I give um, $10,000 for a critical vulnerability. I know that every time I spend $10,000, I get a critical vulnerability. So I love the safety and security of the idea that I know what I'm getting for a price.
Mhm.
And well-intentioned researchers that participate in this program make huge positive impacts to programs. And that's why I think we've seen a general trend toward increasing rewards over the years, wanting to encourage that great behavior. Um, However, the problem I have with it is that 10 of them can come in a month and now I've just spent $1 million in my budget and I wasn't ready for that, or $100,000, or whatever number of what priced vulnerabilities come in. And that's bad, right? Like as a business person helping run the security organization, I need to have predictable spend, and that's challenging for me. And I see the using AI in place of that to go, let's scan all of our code before release and do a lot of pen testing with it and try to find as many vulns as we can. One, finding the vulns seems like the hard problem until you have to find all the engineers to fix them. So there's multiple investments here. It's not just in tokens and multiplying the discoverability internally of bugs. You might also have to deal with the engineering outcomes of that. Then the other thing about it is with an LLM, I have a predictable spend, so it solves that problem for me. I can say I'm going to spend $20,000 on OpenAI Cyber next month, and the next month I'm going to spend 20 grand on Mythos because I want to get a second opinion like I would from my doctor with a cancer diagnosis. What I don't know is what I'm going to get out the other end. Am I going to get 400 null pointer dereferences, or am I going to get a one-click RCE?
There's that. So I don't disagree, especially around predictable spend, but depending on the organization size, it's almost two different buckets of cash, right? Like bug bounty is a security responsibility when secure software development should be a engineering responsibility. So it should come out of two different buckets, in my opinion. Now,
Which makes a misalignment for what you do.
how so?
Because if one team can assume the other team is doing it, they don't have to spend the money on it. And if they're not the same team, they're going to both not do it.
Yeah. Well, hopefully there's some alignment of strategy there. Look, so I don't think bug bounty will go anywhere. Maybe there's a possibility that bugs will actually be worth a lot more. Like if you got a lot less coming through, but and you really want to know about critical bugs, you might actually see bugs being worth a lot more, and a heavier investment from bug bounty hunters to be like, well, it's worth me trying to get RCE in this because of how much they pay. Um, all in all, hey, bug bounties are a great way and an avenue for people to talk to the company. You got to remember too, like not every bug is a software bug, right? Like if you've got a leaky S3 database, you need somewhere to report it, and you should get paid if you responsibly disclose that. So I don't think responsible disclosure and being paid for bugs is going anywhere. And organizations should continue to do that and not just say, I've paid for my $1 million worth of Mythos Cyber 55 M dash insert good security large language model here. Um, they've paid for it. We don't need to worry about it anymore. There's absolutely an avenue for both.
Oh, I think absolutely there's going to have to be a balance of both. And I'm with you on the certainly um, bespoke, hand curated, human discovered vulnerabilities will hopefully take on a higher value, just like I hope human created art takes on a higher value than AI generated art. I think there will be a shift to some degree. And certainly, like one thing we know about these models is they're all operating off of everything they've stolen off the internet, which means human ingenuity in coming up with new creative ways of doing things will find vulns that the machines can't find. And those vulns theoretically should be a lot more valuable because anybody can find them with the machine.
Mm-hmm.
Those become trivial. It's the ones that can't be found with the machine have increasing value because maybe there's an artificial sense of security on the organizations that are using these tools, thinking that they've found them all already. Uh, and I think there's certainly a no-click iPhone or Android or Firefox or Chrome 0 day. I think is only going to be more valuable, not less.
Mm. Yeah, totally agree. So I guess time will tell there. But I don't think we've got to that point yet anyway, right? Like bug bounties are still very valid. We're not seeing the vuln apocalypse just yet. Like as you mentioned, we are seeing like I think it was Chrome or Firefox like had a huge amount of like low level vulnerabilities where
273
you,
or no, 271. Sorry.
I'm going to take your word for it because I don't have the statistic right in front of me. But again, like they would probably have never been discovered by a human, and a lot of those would never have been exploited either because it's not worth it. In saying that, we have seen things like in the every year in Pwn to Own, we see ridiculous amounts of vulnerabilities chained together. So you're like, okay, well, individually, all of these were non-issues, but chained together intelligently, all of a sudden we've got ourselves a really nice looking exploit. And from everything that I've read when it comes to our current wave of frontier models that excel at cybersecurity, the ability to chain vulnerabilities together is incredible. So, being needing to patch these faults is still a requirement, as as insignificant as they may seem.
Well, my mind naturally goes to regressions. If I'm suddenly fixing 300 patches in an update instead of 75 patches in an update, that's a lot more moving parts that might have been independently tested as they were developed, but never in combination. It feels like a regression nightmare.
Potentially, I do wonder, and I'm not trying to offend you here, but I think you're underestimating the capabilities of being able to patch these vulns now with automation. And like, it's not a human that's suddenly getting a list of 271 vulns in Firefox and patching them. Like, the patch is, uh, well, depending on how bad it is, a lot of these patches could be remediated automatically. Human reviews them, but what's a review like? Oh, we put some safety around that, and now it's gone. So, which means that humans are in a creative position now to come up with features, develop new features, probably with an AI sidekick. But when it comes to a lot of these low-level vulns, there's a good chance that they can be automatically patched as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not underestimating that. I just the more moving parts there are, I realize that machines are better at handling large quantities of moving parts than humans are. But it just past experience suggests more things all shifting and changing in short periods of time makes QA harder, which makes mistakes more likely.
Yeah, that's fair. I totally agree. So now, mindful of runtime here, should we talk about market confusion, CISO confusion? Where should we pivot to next?
Yeah, I mean, that would be good. At the very end, I had the idea of also briefly discussing as an industry, also how um, how frequently we have these chats, and like I know you're going to be at Black Hat USA in August. I will also be there. Once a year doesn't seem often enough to stay up to date. In fact, at the moment, it feels like once a week doesn't either. So I think maybe we discuss a little bit of that CISO confusion and then roll into how do those of us who spend a lot of time studying this and are kind of mostly up to date, how do we better communicate that out to the world so others can follow along with us?
Yeah, well, let's talk about CISO confusion first, because I will say, like, I actually like Anthropic generally, but with this massive hype cycle around Mythos, as someone that speaks at industry events, does a lot of roundtables with executives, the amount of board members and executives that were reaching out to be like, hey, are we Mythos ready? Because the board's asking if we're Mythos ready, and we're all freaking out about this Mythos thing because every financial institution, every news outlet, everybody was bracing themselves for something terrible to happen based on this new frontier model. And it was actually really like the first time it happened and someone's like, I need you to talk to my board to tell them if we're Mythos ready or not. And it's like, what does that even mean? Like, what FUD are people consuming to get to this point?
Well, I think it's a partly a culmination of the things we've mostly already discussed in a way, which is if there is this wave of vulnerabilities, will your teams be able to keep up? And unfortunately, I can say for everyone, the answer is no. Um, and because that's the wrong strategy, right? Like the problem is we have to find ways of getting leadership an answer that's not lying to them while also not having the time to fully educate them on how complicated a question that really is,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because that question has multitudes of answers. Because if the fear that's being mostly hyped in the tech media is you're getting a patch every several times a day for critical systems and you're perpetually months behind and constantly owned, and I don't know that that's wrong at the quantity of vulns we're likely to see be fixed in the short term, especially in open source projects, because they can't control the disclosure or discovery of those vulnerabilities in the same way. But my answer as a security professional is, well, then patching is not the answer. Like, it's not that I'm going to stop patching. I don't discourage anyone from patching and patching as quickly as you can. But if in a race between an AI and your security team, you're going to lose every time. A security professional knows that you build mitigations and other layers of protection to both reduce, hopefully eliminate, but at a worst case scenario, reduce the impact of incidents that are going to occur, which we also already touched on earlier,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I guess the concern is that business leaders seem to pay more attention to CNBC than they do to Ars Technica, and I'm not sure how we bridge that gap.
Yeah, it's a difficult one, that's for sure. But yeah, on top of the general patching too, like there just seemed like a bit of an attitude based on all the media around Mythos was, that you're already breached. Like your systems are compromised based on how good this model is, and people just, I think, needed some reassurance that everything was going to be okay and we will get past it. But I think communicating this to non-technical people, and there are a lot of executives at the moment that are very much like all aboard the AI hype train without fully understanding the technology. So then they start to read these things and start to panic. So I found it
I think
really interesting.
I feel like I just feel like we're on a ship and we're halfway across the Pacific and we've just run into a typhoon, and that the next 18 to 24 months are going to be tough for software patching as a whole, but we're going to come out on the other side and it'll be the calmest calm after the storm. Because as you talked about chaining vulns, as you talked about Firefox, all these things, like all these memory safety vulnerabilities, all these corner cases that the machine is more persistent at finding than most humans are, because it just takes trying it 12,000 different ways to find the way that breaks it. And machines are good at that. And there's going to be a tsunami of I'm getting all into my ocean stuff here now. There's going to be a tsunami of vulns, and it's going to be a rough couple years. But I think it's going to be worse for open source than closed over the long term. I think it's going to be a lower height wave for a more extended period of time for closed source software, where they can control and triage fixes. However, when we get to the other end of it, there'll be so much fewer vulnerabilities in our code as a whole. And if some of the automations and techniques you're talking about that AI enables for software engineers results in better code coming into the machine, as well as finding it on the on the other side when it's already baked in as a vuln, we're going to have more secure software than we've had in a very long time. And it's going to be there's going to be a lot of seasickness getting through the storm. But when we get to the other side, I'm pretty optimistic we're going to come out of this better.
Yeah, totally agree. So now just quickly, like, you talked about keeping up to date and how to stay educated on these things and that you wanted to touch on it. I just want to open with that, Chet, to say, like, if you're an industry professional listening to this and you're like, yeah, do tell, it's okay to not be across every single model that's being released and the capabilities of every model. Like, you're just going to burn out, I think, at this point, Chet, trying to figure out what's currently available. Like, yeah, I'm in a number of group discussions at work and personally, and like things are coming out every single day. YouTube is just like, my algorithm on YouTube for one of my accounts is just crammed with like, oh, what you didn't know that didn't exist yesterday style of videos as well. It is hard to keep up to date with everything going on, but it's okay to be somewhat behind. It's not a big deal, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you do have to focus more on the big picture instead of getting involved in every little drama.
Hmm.
That's a big part of this. Um, it is important to not get too far behind. The question is, what's the right loudness level for how much data you can consume. I'll make a brief pitch for a former coworker of ours that was going to reference at the end of the podcast anyway, for those big picture thoughts, which is Joshua Sachs, who used to work at Sophos, and he was at Meta for a long time. And I would consider him one of, if not the most informed people about cybersecurity issues that intersect with these large language models. And Josh spent his career at Meta the last few years exclusively focusing on the security aspects of AI from a cybersecurity perspective. And brilliant guy. He's got a Substack. You should check it out. It's called Joshua Sachs, SAXE 181906.substack.com. I'll include that in the show notes. It's a good way to stay up on these big issues where, his most recent one that I was going to reference as part of this conversation is related to, how advanced these models are and whether they can be controlled. And of course, the United States government recently banned access to Mythos for non-Americans, and there's a lot of confusion and consternation over the political implications of all that. But ignoring the politics, the question is that an effective policy? And Josh argues that that's craziness. Like, anybody can build these, and they are. And there's open weight models now, in particular one called GLM 5.2 that appears to be approaching the frontier models in their sophistication, and certainly for resourced adversaries, not difficult to run. And the genie can't be put back in the bottle, yada yada yada. And he proposes the solution that we deploy the genie to the defenders to get there faster than the attackers. And that's why I think closed source has an advantage over open source in this aspect, in that the defenders have the opportunity to run it themselves before an adversary is likely to be able to, which will give them the opportunity to get ahead of it. But you should read Josh's blog. It's good. That's one way I certainly keep up on the big picture thoughts, and try not to get caught up in whatever social media drama of the day is happening on your preferred platform. Because I don't think, one, half that information is being promoted by somebody with money in the game and have a reason to make an argument that may not include all the facts. And you're much better listening to a few of the luminaries out there like Joshua.
Totally agree. And I will say, actually, there's some really, I don't want to keep pumping Reddit all the time. I know that you're not as big a fan as I am, but there's actually there's a community on Reddit. It's called Local LLM, and it's actually got a lot of enthusiasts that are running local models that have got really grounded approaches and workflows to things that doesn't cost an arm and a leg in order to run it. But there's some really good grounded opinions and conversation there. It's a very non-toxic, healthy subreddit, and I get a lot of insight out of that as well. So a place worth considering for information. But yeah, I will say worth following Joshua Sachs on LinkedIn, not connecting. I don't want him to get a flood, but he's got the ability to follow. So that way you can see when he posts something new, and his just general thoughts and opinions on AI, I've always found to be really valuable as well. So yeah, great shout out there, Chet.
I only wish we were popular enough to cause a deluge of invitations for Joshua on LinkedIn.
Yeah, that's sorry, I'm a bit delusional.
When this podcast receives or achieves that level of success, my pride in our work will increase dramatically. But I think that wraps up most of what we had to say. And as usual, the extremes are rarely true, right? It's not going to end in a full apocalypse, but it's probably not going to be a fun time.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. So cool. Well, this was fun. Thanks, Chet.
There are a lot of places you can find our content, and we do appreciate you listening and hope you share your enthusiasm for our podcast with your friends that may also enjoy it. You can find us over on YouTube at youtube.com/at security take two. Everything, including the show notes, are available on our website at securitytake2.com. And you can always email us at hosts@securitytake2.com. I would love if somebody emailed that wasn't somebody trying to sell me podcast enhancement services.
Or website
And
redesigns.
we're over on Reddit too, right?
Yeah, so we're over on Reddit, so you can find us on reddit.com/r/security take two. That is spelled TWO. Or yeah, just search for us on your favorite search engine.